Hey y'all, this is Lauren from Let's Teach History, and I thought I would talk to you today real quick about how to teach character education in your class without getting political. I know that things like teaching tolerance and equality and all that stuff are trigger words to a lot of people, and it can just cause a lot of division because it means different things to different people. So how can you teach character ed in such a way that you're not being political? Because here's the thing, we do need to make our kids better human beings. I mean, it is the job of the parents, but there's nothing wrong with helping these kids become better human beings by pointing out specific examples in history of people who have good character. So what you need to do is, instead of having a political agenda, throw that out and focus on character traits that everyone would agree on. Focus on things that every person in our society as a whole would agree that it is good for people to have. So for example, integrity. Nobody's going to disagree with you on integrity. Everybody's going to agree that people need to have integrity. Perseverance. Perseverance is a huge one that people need to learn. And I don't think anyone is going to come up to the school and say, how dare you teach my kid to persevere under hard circumstances? It's not going to happen. So I have made a list of various character traits that you can point out to your students during the year that should not be political. They're just going to make them a good human being. And what you need to do, you don't have to start each day with like a character education lesson. Just work it in as you're covering these historical figures, because you're going to have plenty of examples of these things when you're covering historical figures. Some of the list of things, some of the character traits that I would emphasize to my students are integrity, perseverance, respect, responsibility, self-control, patience, gratitude, initiative, and courage. So basically, you've kind of got one for every month you're in school, and that's on my website, and you can download that. It will probably be under teaching tips or miscellaneous information if you look under the resource page. But anyway, it will also be on this blog post if you're watching this video right now via my webpage. But how can you do that then? How can you teach this stuff? So basically, when you're covering a historical figure, if you see one of these instances of one of these character traits, just point it out. So for example, if you're talking about perseverance, you can talk about Thomas Edison and how many times he worked on trying to create an affordable light bulb. You can talk about Teddy Roosevelt with perseverance. Teddy Roosevelt had asthma when he was younger, and his dad encouraged him to be active to help compensate for that. And so he became very active, and he got into boxing and hunting and all kind of stuff. And he even had a boxing ring in the White House, and he had boxing matches when he was president at the White House. So that's such a cool example of perseverance that you can bring up when you talk about Teddy Roosevelt. If you are doing responsibility, you can talk about, in the Civil War, when Robert E. Lee ordered Pickett's charge and lost almost 7,000 men in 1 hour because of him, because of Robert E. Lee. And he, at the end, said, it was my fault. And he actually sent a letter of resignation to Jefferson Davis to take responsibility after the Battle of Gettysburg, which Davis did not accept. But the point is Robert E. Lee took responsibility for his decisions. He didn't blame it on somebody else. He didn't blame it on Pickett. He took responsibility. And those things can be huge lessons for our students. If you think about self-control, okay, you can talk about when George Washington was offered to be made king of the United States. Some of the Continental soldiers and people, there was a letter called the Newburgh Letter that was sent to George Washington recommending that he become king of the United States. And he turned that down. That's self-control. Can you imagine someone offering you the office of king, or the position of king, and you turning it down? So that's a huge example of self-control, because George Washington knew that would not be in the best interest of the country. So those are just some examples. If you talk about courage, you could talk about Harriet Tubman and how when she escaped from slavery, she went back and let other people out. That's a huge example of courage. And selflessness, how she put herself on the line. Selflessness is another good one. Or sacrifice, where you put yourself on the line for other people. That's definitely a big one. You could talk about initiative when you talk about Benjamin Franklin and him inventing the Franklin stove and then giving the plans out to people so that they could build their own. There's all kinds of things in U.S. history that you can use as teachable moments in your classroom without an agenda, without a political statement behind it. You're just trying to make people better. Now, there's two things to remember when you're doing character education. The first thing is, these people in history are not perfect. No one is perfect. Are you perfect? Have you lied before? Have you hurt somebody's feelings before? Have you done something you're not proud of? Have you made mistakes? Yes, everyone has. And so these historical figures, you're not going to find one that's perfect. And so you can't decide, well, I'm not going to talk about this person, or I'm not going to hold them up as an example, because they did this or they did that. Look at the instances where they did do the right thing and show your students, yes, people can make mistakes, but they also can have moments of wisdom, and that if they do make mistakes or make bad decisions, that they can recover from them and their impact is not lost. Because if you teach your students that we're not going to cover certain people or we're not going to talk about them because of the things they did and the wrong things they did, then what you're telling them is your life's not going to matter if you mess up at all. If you ever lie, if you ever cheat, if you ever do one thing wrong, your life is not going to matter and your impact is gone. That's what we're teaching kids when we don't cover historical figures who have done things that are not right. Now, do we need to hold the Nazis up and glorify them and be like, wow, they were a great example of perseverance? No, definitely not. Use common sense, okay? But what I'm saying is, you are going to come across people who, like, for example, Robert E. Lee. Yes, he owned slaves, okay? So you're going to have to mention that. But you can also say, even though he had bad judgment in this area of life, he did have good judgment in this area of life. So I'm not saying you don't need to ignore the hard things. Like, don't ignore them. You need to talk about them. We don't want our students to be naive that there's evil and there's bad things and that people make bad decisions and that people can have glaring contradictions in their life. Look at Thomas Jefferson. So when he was writing the Declaration of Independence, he put a big thing in there about slavery and the evils of slavery that they took out. He wrote that, but he had slaves. So yes, there's going to be glaring contradictions in history, but that doesn't mean we can't learn from these people. That does not mean we can always learn from them. Always learn from them. The other thing that you need to be careful of when you're teaching character education, and this is probably the biggest thing to remember in every story, is that you do not need to instill a victim mentality in anyone. That is not going to do anyone any good. I'm reminded of the quote, you can't expect to be a victor if you're living with a victim mentality. That's the biggest thing. You need to teach people that there are people in history who overcome struggles and difficulties. You don't need to, it's okay to talk about oppression and things like that, but you need to focus on the people who have overcome. Because if you teach kids that they can never be a victor and they can never move past their circumstances, you're just setting them up for just a life of victimhood and failure, and you don't want to do that. So make sure that when you cover this character ed, that you let them know that regardless of where they are, you want to be lifting kids up with this character ed, not pushing them down and making them feel defeated. So always with your character ed, you want to lift them up, build them up, give them hope. You need to instill hope in your students, especially when they are in a day and age where the suicide rates are getting higher and there's so much anxiety and stress out there. Your character ed should be building students up and giving them hope. One more thing I almost forgot. I would love to hear how you use character ed in your classroom. What are some examples of historical figures that exemplify things like gratitude and patience and responsibility and respect? I would love to hear how you use that, or what character traits that you work into your lessons that benefit your kids. So you can leave a message in the comments. You can contact me using my contact form on the webpage. You can email me at lauren@letsteachhistory.com. All the things. So anyway, I hope that was good. And remember, the character ed can also be a good reminder for us, especially perseverance, right? Teachers need to remember perseverance. But anyway, I hope you have an awesome day. A day full of integrity and perseverance and gratitude and responsibility and respect and everything. And now we're going to focus on the character trait of boundaries. And I'm going to stop this video. Adios.